Welcome to the Aging Well podcast. I'm Jeff Armstrong here with Corbin Bruton. In this and the episodes that follow, we will share candid discussions on aging and hear from the experts. We are here to inform and encourage as we experience, aging. Most aging adults know that cardiorespiratory endurance or aerobic exercise like walking, running, biking, or swimming is good for our overall health. In this episode, Corbin and I discuss the greater benefits to including weight training or resistance training in our efforts to, age well.
So, Dr. Armstrong, I was going back and I was listening to episode 36 when we were discussing all the questions from the AARP and the little summaries that they had. And actually going back and reviewing some of that information, there was actually a little side note saying that an impressive 44% of people 80 or older, they do strength training. And I know that you've said a lot in your previous podcast that when we're trying to age well, that should be our number one priority, our number one focus is get that strength training. I know with AARP, I know they just came out with another article that says to live longer, you got to get stronger. Let's dive into that. Let's talk about that for a second.
Sounds good.
All right. It says everyone knows that cardio exercise is crucial for overall health, but the secret to staying strong in vital life isn't just walking, running, biking, swimming, and other forms of aerobic fitness. It's in your muscles. So then they go in and they say that the 2021 review of 16 studies from around the globe, researchers found that 30 to 60 minutes a week of muscle or strength training, also known as resistance training, increases your life expectancy by 10 to 17%. Would you say that's true? Would you say that's accurate?
I'm guessing that the numbers are accurate since I haven't done the research, but absolutely. I think it's one of the most important things that we can do as we age. And I've been kind of on this soapbox a lot over the last few years, particularly in my physiology of exercise class, as I kind of observe some of the more senior individuals in exercise science who have preached aerobic exercise over the years that, because when I was, I got my master's degree in 1986, and that was really my first exposure and dealing with kind of learning about exercise physiology. I've been working with gyms. I think my initial interest was with strength and conditioning with Nautilus training when I was in high school. But the big push was always corporate fitness and cardiac rehab. And it was all about heart health. It was high carbs, low fat, a lot of cardiovascular exercise. And as I look at some of those individuals now, they look frail and just not what I would perceive an exercise physiologist to look like when they're in their 80s. And it just kind of dawned on me at one of these recent conferences that the reason they're like that is because they've been pushing cardio. And what happens as we do cardio and ignore strength training, we're going to see that same sarcopenia that occurs with aging. You're going to lose muscle mass because we're not using the muscle mass. We're not developing the muscle mass. So we lose muscle mass. When you lose muscle mass, what happens to your ability to do cardio?
You can't.
Yeah, you can't do as much, right? Because you can't move your body. And so you become less active because you've lost some of that muscle mass. And it becomes this vicious cycle that as you become less active, we lose muscle mass. Therefore, we become more or less active and lose more muscle mass. And eventually we end up being this frail invalid in our latter years. And if we do strength training exercise, we can do more activity. And just simply being more active is going to, in my opinion, and I think it's very well founded in the literature and the science, the more muscle mass that we can carry and the more active we are, the more we're going to be able to maintain our cardiovascular health as we age. And it's relatively easy to maintain cardiovascular. We've talked a little bit about Tabata, and, whether it's with quotation marks or without, or high intensity interval training and those types of things. You can get a good stimulus for cardiovascular endurance, cardiorespiratory endurance with minimal amount of time commitment. Strength training takes a little bit more effort, but it has much more pronounced gains, I think, over the long haul.
Well, not only that, but like it also helps with, posture, balance, your stability muscles, your bone density. For someone who's reading this, obviously this article kind of talks about individuals that are 80 and older doing resistance training. And I know we've mentioned it in past podcasts, but what would be the best ideal way for someone that's listening to this and they're like, well, if that's the best way for me, to start working out, what would the basics of that resistance training be? What would you suggest that they start doing?
I say just start doing something.
Just start doing stuff.
Right. There was a number of years ago before I went off to Toledo for my PhD. I was working in a Jewish community center in Pittsburgh as a personal trainer. And I had this gentleman, Harry, come to me. He was just turned 84, never lifted weights in his life, and had read an article about a recent tough study where they looked at resistance training in nursing home patients, clients, whatever you would call them. And they found that with minimal amount of resistance training, they were becoming far less dependent on their walking and assistant devices, canes and walkers and so on. And so he determined that for his 84th birthday, he was going to gift himself with a personal trainer, and he was going to eliminate his need for his cane. And he shows up. God bless him. I love this guy. It was so much fun to train. Super slow in his gait. You're much too young to probably remember Tim Conway from the Carol Burnett shows and other comedies, but one of the funniest guys ever. He used to do a kind of a old timer character where he walked really, really slow. He kind of shuffled his feet. And that was Harry. And Harry shows up. He's got his brown loafers on, dark blue socks, Bermuda shorts, and a polo shirt. Walking with a cane there for his first training session. Never lifted weights in his life. And I had the opportunity to work with him for about 3 months. And, in that 3 months, he was carrying his cane rather than, walking with it. He was, I think it was there just because he still had some need for it, or at least needed that reassurance that it was there. But we didn't do a lot of crazy work. We did a lot to build hip strength, worked a lot on leg strength, bit on core strength, and he was seeing great progress. I mean, the guy, obviously was not, flexing in the mirror or doing any of those kind of things, but functionally he saw a significant amount of improvement. So from a starting point, I think it's no different than starting a beginner in lifting. I always go back to the basic 5. Maybe you make that the basic 5 plus 1, the squat, the deadlift, the bench, overhead press, the row, and is that 6th maybe carries, as being the fundamental activities that we should be doing in a strength training program. And there's no reason why anybody at any age couldn't do those exercises. Now, one tends to think, well, deadlifts, that's not an exercise for old people. It's like, do you ever pick something up off the ground?
Yeah.
You're picking it up as a deadlift. And it may start more, maybe we consider it more of the movement patterns that should be involved. And again, that would be the squat. And, you're squatting, you sit and you stand, you're squatting. And so for somebody to be able to get up and out of a chair, they need to have some strength in that squat movement pattern. The other would be the hinge. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a deadlift rather. It could be more of like a Romanian deadlift type of hinge. And again, you don't need a lot of weight to do any of that. It's developing that movement pattern. You get the horizontal press, horizontal row, vertical press, vertical row, or pull press, and then the carries. So, you can define the movements in those ways, but those are the basic movements that we need to do. You may find that with, if you're starting really late in life, that you might need a bit more support before you start doing some of those activities. And that's where, some leg extension, leg curls, those types of things might be useful, or a leg press machine rather than a squat. using machines rather than free weights, but doing things that will begin to develop those movement patterns. I discussed my epigenetics test with True Diagnostic co-founder Hannah Wendt in episode 162. Epigenetic testing measures baseline and changes in your pace of aging, giving you the power to steer your anti-aging or health and wellness journey in the right direction. I learned that I am aging well. Click on the affiliate link in the episode description, use the promo code AGEWELL, and receive a 12% discount on your epigenetics test and monitor your pace of aging.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. Well, I think they're the basic exercise, not the basic exercises, but they are the basic movements of what we do in our daily lives, right? And I think that's why it's so critical to add those movements to your daily workout routine. And it doesn't matter if you're in your 30s or if you're in your 80s, like everyone does those type of movements daily. Like there's not a single time in the day that we don't do one of those 5 or one of those 7. One thing you did mention is hip exercises. And I actually think that's a completely overlooked exercise, like the hip abductors or adductors or just hip flexion extensions. And I think that's a really, really overlooked, and we don't do it enough. But if you look at the individuals like on an athletic level doing that inverted funnel, why wouldn't we want to carry that into individuals that are in that geriatric community to help with their balance and their stability? I started doing that when I worked at an assisted living, and a lot of individuals stopped using their canes or their walkers and saw a lot of huge results. Now, with that also being said, one of the biggest challenges for that demographic, some of the males, they thought about it too, but it was primarily the females. And you hear it in the younger, I don't want to do resistance training. I don't want to do weight training. I'm going to get too big. I'm going to get too bulky. Talk about that for a second.
Okay. And then I want to go back to the inverted funnel. So
perfect.
Make a mental note of that because you triggered some thoughts on that. And so this idea of not wanting to get big and bulky, I don't know if you would have been in the class that I had a number of years ago where a student actually asked me, how do you respond to a woman who tells you that they don't want to lift weights because they don't want to build big and bulky muscles? And, in the past, I'd always had the old, hormonal differences, body structure differences, muscle differences between males and females, blah, blah, blah. But in this particular day, I was just in kind of a bit of an ornery mood. And I just said, tell her she's not willing to put the work in. And as I thought about my answer, it's like, okay, I somewhat intended to be a bit more smart aleck, sarcastic kind of answer there, but that's actually the accurate answer. They're not willing to put in the work, so they don't have to worry about it. If you look at female bodybuilders, that work, those muscles did not come easy to them. They had to work their tails off. And even, male bodybuilders, males might have a little bit easier time putting on that muscle mass, but it's not that significantly different. It takes work to put muscle mass on.
Well, a good majority of men want to, they want to get bigger. They want to have their muscles, and female bodybuilders, same thing. But I mean, you're throwing in another factor of nutrition, supplements, everything. Like it takes a lot of work to get.
Oh yeah. It's diet, it's training, it's recovery,
it's hormone balance.
Yeah. Maybe not even the hormone balance, because the person that's asking that question or making that statement is somebody who doesn't have any desire to be a bodybuilder, obviously.
Right.
And so they're just looking at doing the activities that are prescribed for general health and performance. And it might be a female athlete that just wants to perform better in their sport, but doesn't want big, bulky muscles. It's like, unless you train for those big, bulky muscles, I mean, it's the principle of specificity. The body's going to make specific adaptations to impose demands. Well, if I don't lift heavy things or lift in a high volume enough to trigger the stimuli for muscle development, I'm not going to build big muscles. So if I go in and just do a moderate amount of resistance training that's going to give me some neurological benefit, there might be a slight amount of hypertrophy in there, but who can argue that that slight bit of hypertrophy, even in women, is not going to look good? It makes your body look obviously more appealing. You're much more fit. You're not going to get big just because you lift weights. It's how you lift, and it's, again, did you pick your parents wisely? Okay. I lift 6 days a week, and I lift pretty heavy and lift pretty hard, and I am not a big, massive person, and never have been. So it's easy to say, well, you're 59 now. Of course, you're not going to be big, but I could try 30 years ago, and I wouldn't have gotten as big. So that should never be a reason not to lift weights. And if you are that person who is so blessed that you pick up a dumbbell and you immediately grow a bicep, then God bless you. I hate you. And, you don't have to work as hard, so rather than doing, 3 to 5 sets of something, maybe, 1 to 2 sets is enough to just kind of maintain some level of strength. You don't have to train as frequently, and you have more time in your day to do other things. So develop those areas where you maybe don't grow as quick and as easily.
Yeah. And with my background in training, and whether it's personal training or performance training, teaching courses, I've trained a lot of people over the years, and I've really only had 3 women who were they were really, really putting on muscle mass like super, super fast. And ironically, all 3 of them had a background in gymnastics when they were younger. And I wonder if something like that were to tie into being able to put muscle mass on. But that could also be another subject for another podcast as well.
Just to address that quickly, I think, and again, we really should address this in probably another podcast to be able to get really deeply into it. But it really just has to do with the adaptations that are made to the muscle early on. So, if you do want to really build big muscles, you got to get into it as early as possible. When you start lifting, somebody, like Harry comes to me at 84, he is not going to build big muscles because he just hasn't laid the foundation. And it really comes down to the development of the myonuclei in the muscle and their ability to trigger muscle hypertrophy. And so more than likely those gymnasts, there's 2 things that could be going on. First of all, they were gymnasts because they had more fast twitch muscle fibers. They picked their parents wisely and had the capability to build muscle and strength to be able to perform and excel at gymnastics. But I think also there's that component of they're using the muscles at a much younger age. They're triggering that muscle growth and hypertrophy. And so that carries over into adulthood and their later years, and they have a greater capacity then to build muscle, which is, again, great. They don't have to push themselves quite as hard. And we can go into muscle memory and some of those types of conversations as well. But again, we have plenty of podcasts down the road that we can kind of talk about some of that.
But it kind of ties in with this, right? Because this particular article that we're discussing, it does talk about the 80 plus year olds doing resistance training. But with that starting at a younger age, whether you're involving your kids in a competitive sport or you're in your adult, like late 20s, early 30s, and you're like, man, I just want to be healthier, and I don't want to be frail when I get older. Putting that work in at a younger age, that's going to carry forward. It's almost like putting money into a bank. Essentially, you have it there when you retire. It's going to kind of roll over. You're investing in your muscles. You're investing in your strength, right?
That's
essentially
a good analogy. It's, you start a savings account when you're a kid. Even if you put just a small amount in there and keep it in there, it's going to grow tremendously. If you're preparing for retirement, and that's another topic we'll cover more in depth across this podcast, is you can't start preparing for retirement in your 50s. If you haven't, Doesn't mean you can't or you shouldn't. I mean, you have to start, but you're going to have to be much more aggressive in what you're doing in order to get money aside. It's the same thing with muscle development and health performance. I mean, this whole, the podcast is aging well. Well, aging well, as we have talked about, begins at conception. And, if we get into epigenetics and another topic, aging well might even begin with our grandparents and how they have lived their lives and how that carries over to our parents and into our own genetics and how our genes are turned on and off based on, kind of historical physiology, if you might call it that, I guess. But, if we want to age well, the best way to age well is to begin life much more active, healthy, proper nutrition, begin to maintain a healthy body composition early in life rather than getting into our 40s and 50s and say, oh my goodness, I've let myself go to pot. I got to lose weight. I got to start lifting. I got to go to the gym. And you're already behind the eight ball trying to kind of get yourself healthy and in shape. You can't overcome everything that you've done to your body over the course of your life. And so the best approach is to start early.
All right. Well, before we move forward with the actual article, you wanted me to make a mental note about going back to that inverted funnel.
Oh, yes, the inverted funnel. I was trying to figure out how I could segue back into that myself. So thanks for bringing that up.
Mm-hmm.
So you recall, you actually worked for me when I had my Athletic Republic franchise. And we were working, with a lot of athletes. And, the inverted funnel is a concept that was developed by John Frappier, who essentially founded the principles that Athletic Republic is a sports performance training facility is based on. But the concept of that inverted funnel is, to me, and I still teach it, it's central to my concept of core and of athletic movement and agility and those types of things that, when you have a strong core and strong hips, our movements are going to be much more controlled. And so doing activities that perform within that inverted funnel where we're keeping our trunk relatively stable under our base and we're moving just our legs in multiple directions really helps to develop the hips, develop that core, but it's going to have benefits for not only the athlete, but also for the aging adult. So we tend to think of plyometrics or, speed training, power training, all of those neuromotor skill related components of physical fitness to be things for the athlete. But in reality, they're very good things for the aging adult to consider. And so an adaptation of some of those plyometric types of movements that we did that are kind of centered on that concept of the inverted funnel still carry over for older adults. We might not jump as much initially because, take an 80-year-old with, weak, frail bones and weak musculature, they're liable to get hurt in that. But just simply stepping in multiple directions or moving those hips in multiple directions is going to have a benefit that can potentially limit the risk of falls.
Right.
I'm very big on core, hips, and rotator cuff as being some of the central areas that we build our foundation for strength on. And a lot of the elderly don't have those capabilities. And when we go to gyms, oftentimes when we look at what exercises are available for the hips, a lot of them are the ones that you'll find predominantly females on. That's the abduction adduction machine because it's supposed to tone the butt, right? And it's just in a seated position, where you abduct the legs or adduct the legs. But as you remember, we had the four-way hip machine and we did that, extension, flexion, abduction, adduction from a standing position, more athletic position. That is going to have a greater benefit in terms of strengthening the hips for movement and for performance, whether it's athletic performance or just day-to-day performances. Another thing that we can do is any kind of movement that is going to be multi-directional to get the hip muscles contracting, not only in the frontal plane and the sagittal plane, but in oblique planes, multi directions, 360 degrees around the body. And there's a lot of things that aging individuals can do to do it. Even just dancing,
Right.
as an activity for the older population can have a benefit in that. But in, again, trying to move more forcefully in those multiple directions. And so I think that's an important component. And again, we could probably do a whole podcast on the inverted funnel and, the plyometrics for the aging adults. But I think it's very important for us to develop that multi-directional power, again, keeping the core tight and doing it with that inverted funnel principle.
Well, from personal experience, it works. And it was with the knowledge that you kind of passed on to me, bringing it to that assisted living. We were able to, I was able to create an entire exercise program that is now actually used in that West Coast franchise, but it helped with balance, stability. There were more and more residents there that they before couldn't even get out of a chair without assistance or a gait belt. And they were standing up on their own and they were walking. And then one of the staff would be like, "Oh, don't forget your walker." And they're like, "Oh, I guess I," and now it didn't happen overnight. It happened over a series of months, even a year and a half. Like it took a long time. So if anyone's listening to this, don't just think, "Oh, I'm going to try this for myself," or "I'm going to try this for my aging mother and everything's going to be fine because I listened to it on a podcast." It takes time, it takes work, it takes effort, and you want to make sure that you're using good form and technique, but it is proven to help with balance and stability. There was one super, super, super rare scenario where there's woman, she actually was wheelchair bound. And we just worked every single day on the hips. And eventually she was able to walk for only 5 yards. Right. And I'm not saying like, "Oh, try that," but her daughter was there and her daughter started crying and that's a really rare scenario. I'm not suggesting like, "Oh man, your loved one's going to start walking," but it does show the importance of strength training. It does show the importance of, what we consider to be athletic training for sports. It does carry forward with that geriatric community. Mm-hmm. And it is a really we need to start changing our mindset of, working out is not just for athletes or individuals doing sports. It's for our well-being. Like it truly does carry forward. Do you have anything that you'd like to add with that?
Oh, goodness. I have probably about 50 episodes that I would add to that.
Okay.
I would refer back to episode 27, where we met with the individuals from the Dallas retirement community and talked about posture and balance and some of those things. Because we touched on some of that in that particular presentation to those individuals. And I remember there was one woman in the group who was asking me about her mother. This is, a senior in a retirement community talking about her mother. So you can imagine that her mother must have been ill as well. But she was, kind of bedridden and needed, to try and move. And what could she do? And it's like, well, in that situation, just simply being able to lift the leg off the bed is the beginning, So we tend to think of, well, I'm too far gone to be able to start this. And I think that's far from the truth. If you have the capability of moving a joint, even if it's only a minimal amount and it's against no resistance, you're still moving it against resistance because you're lifting the weight of the limb, right? So you move it as much as you can. You begin to progress how far we can move it, how often we can move it. And then eventually you can get to where maybe there's a little bit of resistance applied to it and a little bit more resistance, a little bit more resistance. We start challenging the body a little bit more. And over time, we begin to recapture some of that lost functionality in the muscle. And, some of it is, just being able to walk up steps is such a benefit for aging adults.
Totally.
And, you can build up to that. It might just be, stepping up on, a 4-inch block up and down, and then progress that to a 6-inch and then 8-inch and a 12-inch, and then maybe going up more of those and just It's all progression. Start where you're at. Where do you need to go? And how do you take the little baby steps to get there?
Man, I love it. Baby steps. Gosh, I just feel like we're getting off topic and I want to dive into this, but I could talk about that all
we
day
can do
long.
this in some other time.
So going back to the live longer, get stronger article, one of the things that they were claiming is by doing resistance training and strength training, you will keep your brain healthy. One of the studies looked at 970 people living in senior communities who had no evidence of cognitive decline. Researchers put the subject through a series of strength tests measuring their upper and lower extremities. Over the next 3.6 years, 15% of the subjects developed Alzheimer's disease, but their risk was strongly determined by where they fell on the strength scale. For every 1 point increase in muscle strength, a subject's risk of Alzheimer's had dropped by 43%. We've talked about this in our previous podcast. There's no way to prevent the onset of Alzheimer's, but there is a way to delay it, right? And I think we've talked about in previous podcasts how there has been studies that if you're working your fine motor skills, that is one thing, but there's also research out there that resistance training can also delay that as well.
Yeah, working the gross motor skills as well. And, it's the connection between the brain and the muscle. It's like any muscular movement begins and ends in the brain. We taught that in Phys of X, right? That, the brain has to initiate those conscious movement patterns, whether they're fine motor patterns or more gross, big movements like walking upstairs. And so the more we are activating those motor units and those motor pathways, the more the brain is getting activity, but the more the muscle itself is getting the activity. And so, it is interesting that, and again, you look at some of the studies, there's a lot of other factors that might be contributing to whether or not somebody develops Alzheimer's or not, and when they do, but it's a pretty strong correlation there that if we are more active, we are going to minimize the risk of earlier onset of dementia. It doesn't mean that we are necessarily preventing it or delaying it. I think we don't know yet whether we can actually prevent Alzheimer's because, there's other factors that contribute to it, but we can certainly seemingly delay it. And if we can have 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years of better cognitive life, we talked in that episode 36 about taking a pill, whether we would take a pill to be able to add 10 years to our lives. This is that pill. And you can add 10, if you can add 10 years of, conscious functional life, then why wouldn't you take that particular pill? Unfortunately, this isn't a pill. You got to do a little effort to do it.
Diving back into the article, one of the claims, they'll say you'll reduce your risk of future weight gain. And obviously, the more resistance training, and we've talked about that in previous podcasts as well. But what they're claiming is a low level of muscular fitness was associated with higher odds of gaining at least 22 pounds over the ensuing 20 years. I feel like that's pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah, there's a lot in there. I mean, obviously the muscle mass maybe isn't exactly what is causing that difference. People have the muscle mass because they are more active, and that's why they're more active. So they're going to resist that tendency to gain weight. People who are going to gain weight more are the people that are less active. And we know that, once we hit about the age of 25, there's a progressive decline in our activity levels as we age. Some of that is associated with muscle mass, but that loss of muscle mass is associated with the inactivity. So it's kind of a catch-22 there. We become less active, we lose muscle mass. We lose muscle mass, we become less active. And with that decreased activity, unless there is some compensatory change in our caloric intake, we are going to gain body fat over time. And so it makes perfect sense that our body weight, our body fat is going to be closely associated with our amount of lean muscle tissue. We also know too that lean muscle tissue is a highly metabolic active, skeletal muscle is a highly metabolically active tissue, and it requires a lot of energy just simply to maintain it. And so having more muscle mass, more of your calories are going to go into that, maintaining that protein synthesis and maintaining that muscle mass. And so that's going to, whatever extra calories we might be accumulating over our lifespan, many of those are going to be going into the muscle instead of into our adipose tissue.
Just for a listener that maybe, in that 80 age demographic, if they hear that, they're probably thinking to themselves, well, if I start working out and I start putting more muscle on, yeah, it's essentially spiking my metabolism. Does that also mean that I need to eat and consume more? Or if I'm doing that resistance training, am I just going to instantly lose that muscle? Right? Because
you lost me on the losing the muscle piece.
Because they're working out, they're spiking their metabolism. They got to feed that muscle as well. And if they're not eating enough.
I see what you're saying. Okay, yeah. So the caloric balance piece of
Correct.
it, in order to build muscle, you have to be in a caloric excess.
Correct.
So there's a couple things. I mean, if you are, and again, this question could be addressed to any age. If you are under muscled and under fat, you're going to need to significantly increase your calories to put on muscle mass. And that gets hard for somebody who is naturally very slender, very lean, and has a high metabolism already. It's hard to eat enough food to put on that muscle mass. And is it, unless you're really looking to bodybuild or looking to really significantly increase muscle mass, it's not a big issue. You lift weights, you're going to naturally probably eat a little bit more. Those calories, they're going to go where they're most needed. And if your muscle needs it to grow, you're going to get those calories. Obviously, you're going to need a few more calories in order to grow at that point. If you're on the other end of the age spectrum and you are very lean and under muscled, same thing. You're going to need more food in order to gain that muscle. If you don't increase your caloric intake and you're lifting weights, you're still going to get the benefits of that. You're probably still going to see maybe a little bit more refinement in your number of or your amount of body fat, but you're going to build strength, and you can build that strength even without adding muscle mass. And so the benefits are still there, still very good. If you are over fat and under muscled, and you definitely don't want to be increasing your caloric intake because, now I'm lifting weights, I can eat more. Well, no, because you're already in a caloric excess. That's why you have excess body fat. And so if you eat more to fuel the muscle, at the very best, you're going to maintain that percent body fat and gain some muscle, because the new calories are going into the muscle, but you still have that same amount of fat. That may not benefit your health. So if you're in a caloric excess that's causing your fat to creep up as you're aging, you don't have to eat more in order to put on that muscle. You just need to increase your activity level, maintain your caloric intake, maybe even decrease it a little bit, depending on where that body fat is at, and you'll build that muscle.
So speaking of building muscle and nutrient flow to the muscle and what our body uses, getting rid of that excess fat, one of the claims is you'll keep your blood pressure under control. In another study, high levels of muscular strength were associated with the reduced risk of developing high blood pressure among men with pre-hypertension. Again, I think that's self-explanatory. And I think this goes back to episode 36 when we were talking about that pill that could help us live longer. So in reality, it looks like the overall that pill that everyone wants is resistance training, right? The benefits are so far we're helping with our brain health. We're helping with our strength. We're helping with our balance, our stability. We're preventing that weight gain, the excess weight gain. We're lowering our blood pressure. Lowering blood pressure. Do you have anything to dive in on that?
No, I mean, that's, I think, pretty self-explanatory there as well. There's a lot of mechanisms involved there. And I think any activity is overall going to have a positive benefit on blood pressure. You probably get way too deep into the physiology to address that. And I think it's probably well enough for any of our listeners just to accept the fact if you're active, you're doing resistance training or endurance exercise, either one of them is going to have a benefit in reducing your blood pressure. I think a lot of it goes back to, some of the other changes. We're altering our body composition, we're altering our insulin sensitivities, all those types of things ultimately end up contributing to a reduced blood pressure.
Mm-hmm.
Goes back to whole countering metabolic syndrome.
And what goes hand in glove with blood pressure in the vascular system? You'll slash your risk of heart disease. Several studies have shown that the greater your muscular strength, the lower your chances of developing metabolic syndrome.
Just mentioned that, didn't I?
Oh. He did. It's almost as if you study this. A constellation of health issues, including excess abdominal fat, high blood pressure, high blood sugar, and high cholesterol, all of which are tied to heart disease. And the greater your muscular strength, the lower your levels of inflammatory compounds, which may also help to lower your risk of heart disease.
Yeah, I think it, ultimately goes back to metabolic syndrome. There, again, one of the core issues with metabolic syndrome, and for the listener who might not be familiar with what metabolic syndrome is, it's the occurrence of really three medical conditions. You have insulin resistance, high triglycerides, high blood fats, and hypertension. And central to that is obesity, because obesity is going to have an impact on our insulin sensitivity, our insulin resistance, and that in turn increases the amount of triglycerides that are in the blood. It also has an effect on, with higher levels of insulin in the blood, more pro-inflammatory type of effects in the vessels. We will tend to see more retention of salt. We have more vascular changes that could lead to injury, hardening of the arteries, and more changes in the sympathetic nervous system that will ultimately elevate our blood pressure. And the combined effect of all of that leads to heart disease, because the heart's having to work a lot harder in order to pump its blood. And so, if we want to minimize that, we need to affect our body composition, and resistance training is going to have a positive effect on body composition. It's going to have a positive effect on the vasculature as we increase the blood flow to the muscles. And it's going to increase our insulin sensitivity, which means that we're more likely to take up glucose into the muscle to store that as glycogen for future muscle contractions, rather than it getting stored as fat in the body.
Speaking of insulin, what a perfect segue. Resistance training, by performing it, on the regular, you'll beat back diabetes. Higher muscle mass has been associated with better insulin sensitivity and a lower risk of developing diabetes or prediabetes. In a study of 13,644 subjects, those with a lower percentage of muscles were 63% more likely to have diabetes than those with a higher percentage of muscles. And I think that ties into everything that you just said. You're not storing it necessarily in the body, but you're able to take that nutrients and put it into the muscles, where you're able to burn through the act of resistance.
And again, going back to more muscle means more activity means better health.
I really don't see any negative side effect of resistance training at this point.
Those big bulky muscles that we don't want.
Yes.
I've never had anybody, especially as I'm aging, that has said, "Oh my God, you're putting on too much muscle mass." Maybe as a female, but even if you look at like an aging female, you see a woman in her 60s, 70s that still has some toned musculature to her. People like take notice of that, right? And it's like, wow, she's really healthy. She looks great. And they're doing so much more. I've never seen anybody complain about, oh my God, that grandma is just too muscular.
If anything, they're like, wow, grandma walked up a huge flight of stairs to get to the top peak of a summit to overlook a view in Hawaii for a trip that she treated herself to during the time of retirement. Grandma was able to keep up with all of us grandkids, and man, she was
Us
here and there.
grandkids aren't able to keep up with grandma.
Yeah. So a lot of these are a lot of these subjects that this article is talking about, for the most part, are really, really positive. There is another thing that is positive, but it could be a little bit controversial. But with resistance training, they claim that you'll be better poised to battle cancer. That can be a controversial statement, but it's also, I mean, the research that's out there it's true. You can be better poised to combat it. In this particular one, it states that breast cancer patients with high muscle mass have a greater chance of surviving the disease than those who have a lower muscle mass. According to a study of 3,241 women who were roughly in the medium age range of 54 with stages 2 or 3 invasive breast cancer, and in a study of men who had undergone a radical prostatectomy to treat prostate cancer, those with the lower levels of muscle mass were more likely to see a reoccurrence of that cancer and more likely to die of the disease. Bottom line, lift weights and you'll beat cancer.
Yeah. Again, I mean, that's not causal effect research. It is, correlational research, and there's probably multiple other factors that contribute to that. But certainly, it underlines the idea that resistance training is going to have huge benefits to your health if we approach it correctly.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there are the rare scenarios where, I know for a fact there was a gentleman that I worked with, and he was super, super healthy and super fit. And he ended up getting cancer, and he did everything he could to combat it. And ironically, he ended up passing away from a heart attack. There are those rare scenarios where it's kind of out of our control, but the whole takeaway is it helps you combat it, right? If this is saying that a higher percentage of individuals with a higher muscle mass can actually combat that cancer, or it can combat diabetes, or it can combat Alzheimer's or dementia, why would you not want to put yourself in a position where the odds are in your favor?
Yeah.
Can it happen across the board? Yeah. There are risks that, you could be doing all this work and you could be doing all this effort to do something, but we also have individuals that take Tylenol. And I don't know if you've ever seen a warning label on Tylenol. Like, that's pretty big, but people still will pop that pill in order to take that risk. Several studies over generations have proven that there's less of a risk by doing this, and your body can adapt, and for your overall health becomes more successful. Your overall health is placed in a position where you're at a way lower risk of getting all these ailments or diseases that a lot of individuals fear, right?
Well, you look at, we talked in episode 36 about taking a pill to extend your life. I don't know of any pharmaceutical that does not have contraindications and warning labels on them and side effects and all that other kind of stuff. I mean, across the board, you see the advertisements on TV for certain pills, which are always interesting. It's like, ask your doctor if this is right for you. Well, you shouldn't be asking your doctor, hey, doc, should I be taking this pill? Self-diagnosing yourself. Any of those pills are always going to have a big, long list of side effects. What are the side effects of exercise? And, what are the risks? Yes, there are risks with exercise, but the only risk that I'm really fully aware of in exercise is the risk of overdose.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously. And that sounds kind of odd, but you can overdose on exercise if you don't do it right. You don't follow the prescription appropriately. But there, what are the side effects? Oh, you might grow muscles. You might improve your appearance. You might reduce your risk of cancer and heart disease. You might reduce your risk of insulin dependency or, of diabetes.
You might increase your ability to keep up with your grandkids and live longer.
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely positive side effects that come with resistance training. And honestly, I see very little downside to that being a priority in the lives of anybody who is attempting to age well.
Well, and also on the subject of aging well, you got to do what's right for you. And in one of our past podcasts, we talked about not only physical health, but mental health as well. And we talked about the importance of mental health and how there's a wave of depression, anxiety. We talked about the dangers of the COVID-19 pandemic, not the actual virus itself, but the isolation that COVID-19 actually caused and the dramatic effect that it did on people's depression, anxiety, that isolation. Well, with resistance training, they actually claim that you'll stay happier. A study of 3,000 adults ages 54 to 89 found that having a strong grip was inversely associated with symptoms of depression. Strong, healthy, happy. If that sounds like the future for you, for yourself, it's time to make your muscles a top priority. Make sure you're getting 25 to 30 grams of protein in every meal and talk to your doctor about starting a muscle building fitness program.
So talking to your doctor, that to me is another consideration. And if you have a doctor who does not encourage exercise and does not encourage resistance training, might be time to look for another doctor.
Right.
Because too often, doctors go, oh, you're too old for that. You shouldn't be doing that. And unfortunately, many in our medical profession are not adequately trained to prescribe exercise. They can prescribe pills out the wazoo, but they don't know enough about exercise. And that's hopefully a change that we'll see in the medical profession, that maybe over the course of time, we can start to understand the preventative side of medicine, the cost savings benefit of exercise when it comes to medicine. But still, there's a lot of doctors that just do not understand exercise and the role that it plays in healthy living. And so I wouldn't necessarily direct somebody, especially a novice in exercise, to get their exercise advice from their physician. Get their approval to exercise, their clearance to approve, their clearance to exercise from their physician, but then go to a qualified fitness professional, somebody well-trained, somebody with a degree in exercise science, somebody with proper certifications and experience, particularly experience working with the elderly population. If you are elderly, if you are young and looking to age well, then get early guidance and get into an exercise program as early as possible. Do it within the confines of your health abilities, but do not restrict yourself from it because you have a doctor that says you shouldn't be exercising unless there's a good, valid reason medically why you should not be doing resistance training. And honestly, teaching a pathophysiology and exercise class, there are very few situations, if any, where any kind of exercise is going to be detrimental to your health.
Right. Yeah.
So a big pill to swallow there today.
It's a huge pill to swallow.
Anything to add or to conclude with today's podcast?
No, I really like what you said about finding a doctor that supports physical activity and movement and reaching out to an individual who is properly certified or has the training or has the experience of working with individuals in that geriatric community, or whatever the case may be, right? If you're an individuals with Parkinson's, a lot of research out there shows that resistance training and pushing yourself can help with that. But not a lot of individuals know. But there are programs that are out there with trained, certified individuals that put on these exercise performance. I don't know are we able to drop a a plug, drop a name?
Sure.
So here in Oregon, we actually have the Brian Grant Foundation. Brian Grant was actually one of the Portland Trailblazers who ended up getting Parkinson's at a fairly young age, and he worked with a lady by the name of Kimberly Berg, and they created the Brian Grant Foundation, and they've helped impact a lot of family and a lot of loved ones who knew someone or someone who ended up getting Parkinson's at a fairly young age, and they've kind of started this whole movement, this whole program, and it's really cool. So no matter what it is, if you're in your 30s and you're like, man, I want to make sure that I'm physically active when I'm a senior, or you're a senior citizen and you're like, I want to maintain what I got. It really just seems that staying active and adding that resistance training to your daily life and just making it part of your daily routine is going to add that longevity to your life.
Yeah, and I'd refer everybody back to episode 19 with Carmine Arpea, when we talked about exercise for Parkinson's and for other seniors, but we talked about Carmine's law, which is strength plus posture equals balance,
mm-hmm.
and the importance of that, and strength being such a key component to just healthy aging. In so many different ways. And I think we've only really just scratched the surface even on the benefits of what resistance training can do for the aging population. And, if you are an older adult, it's not too late to start.
It's not too late.
If you are a younger individual listening to this, it's time to start. If you have kids, grandkids, get them involved in regular resistance training, weight-bearing type activity as early as possible. We didn't even talk about osteoporosis and a role that strength training can play in that as well. But these are all things that can help us, age well.
Absolutely. Aging well.
Thank you for listening. I hope you benefited from today's podcast. And until next time, keep aging well. If you have topics you would like to have us discuss on the Aging Well podcast, please click on the links in the episode description to send us a text or record your message or comments. We'd love to hear from you and how we can help you age well. If you benefit from the Aging Well podcast and would like to support the content financially, please click on the Support the Show link or support our affiliates and advertisers.